All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into a source that makes a pretty bold claim that the original, liberating teachings of Jesus were systematically flipped on their head over the centuries and turned into a system of control. We're going to walk through the argument this text presents, step by step. Everything really hinges on this one single powerful idea. According to the source, this quote isn't just some nice poetic phrase. Nope, it's the absolute core of the original message. The idea that the divine isn't out there somewhere, but it's right here, inside every single one of us. So this first part is all about what that original message actually looked like. The source we're examining claims it was a radical path of self-realization, a direct call to discover the divinity within yourself without needing some big institution to give you permission or access. And this gets right to the heart of it. Inner divinity, as the source defines it, means you're already connected. So, when Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," the argument is he wasn't just being poetic. He was literally collapsing the distance between a person and God, empowering the individual directly. And that, of course, is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the message was so simple and so empowering, why does so much of organized religion today feel, well, so different? The author suggests this massive shift wasn't some kind of accident. This brings us to the core thesis of the source material, that there was a deliberate, 5-step strategy designed to take this message of inner freedom and transform it into a system of external control. Okay. So here is the roadmap the author lays out. We're going to break down each of these 5 steps to see how, according to this text, a spiritual revolution was turned into a religious institution. First up, the original idea. The source argues that Jesus' movement was completely decentralized. People were empowered to connect to God on their own terms. But here's the thing. A decentralized spiritual movement is a huge threat to any kind of hierarchy. And this slide just illustrates that first inversion perfectly. The idea of inner sovereignty gets replaced with external dependence. All of a sudden, you need a gatekeeper, a priest, a bishop, an institution to get to God. The church becomes the essential middleman, and all that spiritual power gets centralized. The second step in this supposed inversion is all about rules. The source points out that Jesus was constantly putting love above the law. He was kind of a rule breaker, right? Calling for people to use their own judgment and discernment rather than just blindly following doctrine. But that got flipped. Spiritual maturity was replaced with what the author calls spiritual infantilization. So instead of trusting your own inner compass, the new message was obey the rules, confess to a priest, follow the law. It just makes people way easier to manage. The third step is a big one. It deals with emotion. The source argues that the original teaching was all about liberation from fear and guilt. It was a message of unconditional forgiveness and love. So the crucial point here is how fear was apparently weaponized. Concepts like eternal damnation and hellfire became these incredibly powerful tools for mass control. I mean, if you can convince people that disobeying leads to infinite punishment, you've got their loyalty for generations. Now, how do you make sure these other ideas don't come back to the surface? Well, according to the author, you conduct a purge. You get rid of any and all texts that might remind people of their own inner power. And this slide gives us a historical anchor for that claim. At big councils like the famous one at Nicaea, church leaders made choices. They picked the texts that supported a centralized authority and systematically suppressed the ones that didn't, slapping the label heresy on them. And these are just some of the texts the author is talking about. The Gnostic Gospels, things like the Gospel of Thomas, are said to contain a very different version of Jesus' teachings, one that's way more focused on consciousness, direct knowledge, and self-realization. This brings us to the final and, according to the source, the most brilliant step in this whole inversion. The original call to follow me, well, it wasn't about passive worship. It was a call to action. It meant, awaken the way I have awakened. Embody this state of consciousness for yourself. And here it is, the final pivot. Jesus was transformed from a model to be emulated into an idol to be worshipped. By making him this unreachable divine being totally separate from humanity, the institution ensured his followers would stay passive spectators instead of becoming active participants in their own awakening. So let's put it all together. This core conflict, this idea of worshiping an external figure versus becoming an awakened individual, that's the ultimate summary of this great inversion the source describes. I mean, this table just lays the entire strategy out with incredible clarity. Look at the left column. You have a message of empowerment, liberation, and inner divinity. And on the right, a message of dependence, obedience, and institutional power. It's a stark contrast, to say the least.
But the story doesn't end there. The author actually concludes on a hopeful note, arguing that after basically 2,000 years of suppression, this original message is starting to bubble back up to the surface.
And what's wild is that the tools of this resurrection are all technological. The internet, digital archives, decentralized networks, they're making the very texts that were once burned and buried available to anyone, anywhere. They're completely bypassing the old gatekeepers. This quote really just captures the ultimate takeaway from this source material. It reframes the whole narrative, suggesting the true legacy of Jesus isn't a religion at all, but a revolutionary path to human consciousness. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. Because if this source's argument is taken seriously, it stops being a historical debate, and it becomes a deeply personal one. It asks us to think about what awakening might actually look like in our own lives, right here and right now.